down in the kitchen. There's a big supply down in the kitchen. All right, then our usual things are going to keep happening this week. Our story time tomorrow morning, our Wednesday evening activities, Friday morning studies, and then our sick. Don't really think there's anything new with any of our members, or at least not too much from last week. Anybody have anything to report about our own members? Okay, then we have some bad news from the grounds. Dave, good morning, Gwen. Dave and Lisa, their son, who was 37, passed away last weekend. His name is Brad, and so they're going through a tough time with that. He had several health problems. But of course, regardless of the reason, everybody knows it's just a terrible ordeal for them. So remember the grounds. My wife is over at the house this morning. She has come down with a serious, what shall we call it? Breathing, congestion, whatever problems. And she's been out of commission for 2 or 3 days. I have a question, and this comes from Leanne's post about a gentleman named Mike, and that he has cancer, and I guess he used to come here a long time ago. I didn't see a last name in her posts or anything. So,
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Nobody knows. Okay. Well, we'll see if we can get some more information on that. And that's really all the new information that I have. Anybody else have anything? Yes, Gwen.
One update, Carter can be taken off the list because he passed away.
Yeah, Keith just told me that.
Tammy, just was in this past week. She's back in West Bend, but they are getting her set up with hospice. They're trying to get her back to a care facility that's in Moon, Coraopolis. I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah.
I can get that to you.
But she's definitely under hospice care now?
Yeah, they're trying to get that set up.
Okay.
She has a lot of confusion and cognitive because of brain cancer.
Okay.
As far as I'm concerned, still waiting on the liver biopsy results. My ferritin levels were still high. Tuesday, I will go for my first phlebotomy. And Wednesday, my cardiologist.
Tell me again what a lobotomy is.
They're going to remove blood because I've been diagnosed with hemochromatosis,
Okay.
which is heritage.
I don't know why, but whenever I hear the word lobotomy, I'm thinking they're removing your brain. I don't, what's that come from? Why is that stuck in my head?
When I heard it from my oncologist, I was like, what? Wait a minute.
Okay. All right. They're not removing Gwen's brain yet. Okay.
They're removing blood because I have too much iron.
Okay. She took too many Geritol tablets. Actually, I'll tell you a little story. I could be accused of that since there's no kids in here. Me and my buddies, when I was about 10 years old, were playing hide and seek and stuff around the house, and we were looking for M&Ms for energy pills. And my mother's Geritol tablets were on the mantle, and I thought they were M&Ms, so I gulped a couple down and horrified my parents. But I'm still here with a little extra iron. All right, so if there's not anything more, you can turn to Matthew chapter 6. Continue our study of this very meaningful and practical section of the Scriptures, Sermon on the Mount. And we are in the midst of the first three points that Jesus makes in chapter 6. And I have labeled them, have a higher purpose. First one is in doing good. Second one, have a higher purpose in prayer. And today we're on the have a higher purpose in fasting. We didn't really finish all of last week talking about prayer. And I said that we would at least come back to it a little bit. But so let's just reflect on this. And let's just take the time to read it. Verse 5 of Matthew chapter 6. And when you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. That is a point that is brought out with all these things. You do things to be seen of men, well, that's all the reward you're going to get. But, verse 6, but you, when you pray, go into your room, and when you have shut your door, pray to your Father who is in the secret place. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. And when you pray, do not use vain repetitions as the heathen do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Therefore, do not be like them, for your Father knows the things you have need of before you ask Him. And then we get into the Lord's Prayer, or the model prayer that Jesus gives us, beginning in verse 9. And I say model because of how it's introduced in the beginning of verse 9. In this manner, therefore pray, our Father who art in heaven, or in the New King James, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day your daily bread, and our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. And a couple other comments Jesus makes about forgiveness in verses 14 and 15. For if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. All right. Anybody want to make any further comments or ask any questions about these remarks on prayer?
I like the way you described this as being a model prayer. We just had discussion a couple months ago with somebody that had been attending but was struggling with the fact that we did not use this prayer in our worship service
Right.
every time. And that was a stumbling block for them and wanting to be here. So the mindset out in the religious world is that we're supposed to say these words
Right.
when we pray. And that's not what Jesus' point is in this model of what a prayer should
Right.
basically entail.
The general emphasis in denominationalism is about what is called rote. What is ROTE? Anybody know what that is? Rote prayer, wrote, something usual, habitual. If I do this thing, then I'm good. If I don't do this thing, well, then there's a problem. And so they throw, of course, the Lord's Prayer, example of prayer here, into that mix. It's something that we must do. And yet, when we go through the rest of the New Testament, where it talks a whole lot about worship, do we find it ever again? The answer is no. And so the question is, well, is that what Jesus meant by, in this manner, pray in this manner? This is what you should be doing in your worship service. And obviously that's not quite the meaning that Jesus has. Now, obviously, what Jesus says here is very meaningful and practical, especially with somebody who's learning, somebody who is beginning to lead prayer. There would be several things from this prayer that you could put into practice, and they would be great. But as far as a rote, something that I have to repeat the exact words of, number one, when it comes to repeating the exact words of, did Jesus speak English? No, Jesus did not speak English. So you may think, well, I am saying what Jesus says. Well, no, you're not. Jesus spoke in Greek and the common language of the day. And so, to think that it's almost like it's a magic potion. I say these exact words. Well, we don't want to develop that habit. And even as Jesus sums up here in verses 5 through 8, this is not about vain repetitions. This is about speaking from your heart to God, privately, and then even the guy who's leading the prayer, of course, he's not saying, repeating the same things over and over again. Now, I do understand as we get older, as the church gets older, it used to be, when I was a teenager, that I could tell you who was leading the prayer based on the words they were saying, because they would repeat some of the same lines. And what's some of those lines? Now, Mark, what's some of those lines? Yeah. Here's one. God, guard, guide, and direct us in our every living way. That was said a lot back then. Just all kinds of phrases that and that became a part of our habitual prayer, and a lot of guys repeating them. But again, if we're going to be sincere to God, we're expressing things not from a magical, this is the way you pray, but from our heart. Okay, so anything else about prayer? Anybody want to mention? Okay. Yeah, right. A lot of those things were not in and of themselves wrong. It was just sometimes, especially when you're nervous, you start just repeating, this is what I should say. Maybe you're not really thinking about it, but stuff like that. Okay? Anything else? All right, so let's get into verses 16 through 18 this morning. And this is the same thing Jesus is going to talk about, but in this case, having a higher purpose in fasting, which is almost the forgotten practice in the church today. And so we need to spend some time talking about this. Jesus is giving these instructions, again, on the Sermon on the Mount. And it's the same thing that we ran into with the first two. Moreover, when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites, with a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces, that they may again appear to men to be fasting. Surely I say to you again, they have what? They have their reward. You wanted to be appreciated because you're deeply religious, because you're fasting, and we all know it now. Well, that's your reward. It's not a reward that's going to come from God, because verse 17, but you, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that you do not appear to men to be fasting, but to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. So once again, and we'll get on into new things next week, but here, this third point, doing things to be seen of men, to appear to be religious. You want credit from men? Well, okay, you get your credit from men, but you're paid in full. So we want to steer away from that. Now, let's talk about what fasting is. What is fasting? Okay, that's why I don't like to use PowerPoint. Okay, fasting is going without food. I would say we go through the Bible, we will find at least a couple of instances where fasting included going without water as well. But fasting, going without food for a religious reason, and one of those reasons is listed on the screen. You are trying to, you're mourning. Why would you fast when you're mourning? Okay, it could be like that. It could be a natural reaction. I'm so low and deflated, and the fasting just kind of goes right along with this naturally. But with the fasting, there are all kinds of different ways to fast. These are biblical examples of the time in fasting. Of course, what's big in our mind is Moses, and then Jesus. I think the prophet Elijah, he fasted for 40 days. I think so. But anyway, so we put a time of 40 days. But of course, there are other time periods of fasting. And then we have, what's the fasting that they use? Mostly you hear about it with weight loss or intermittent fasting. And what is intermittent fasting, Mark? 18 hours. And I go 18 hours. Yeah. And of course, fasting is not a Christian-only principle. Obviously, the Jews did fast, and of course, we always are hearing about the Muslims and their calendar of religious practices, and they have this a time for fasting and so forth. There is the fasting during the day. I will fast during the day. Just anything that is out there we can do. Now, when we get into that, it still comes down to what Jesus has to say, which is that we should fast. And what's the whole point? Okay. Okay. Again, to bring us closer to God, the whole idea is I am doing without physical pleasures, in this case, food. I'm going without food to bring me closer to the spiritual only aspect of my relationship with God. And that's how it's supposed to work. Now, the rest of the New Testament, it does mention fasting, but we just don't get a whole lot of information involved with it. And so we're supposed to do things that, are to be between us and God. What was the problem the Jews were having that Jesus points out here? Same old, fasting to be seen of men. Well, how can fasting be seen of men if I'm going without food? Well, fine, I will make my face look dried out, gaunt. I will lose weight. By the way, who was the guy? He was not Muslim or Jewish or Christian, but he was known for fasting to make a point. Anybody know who that was? And he was successful. Mahatma Gandhi. He would fast, for long periods of time. And one of the reasons he fasted was when the Hindus over in India, and Gandhi was a Hindu, would be there'd be strife between the Hindus and the Muslims in India, and he would fast. I'm going to not eat until you guys quit fighting. And sometimes that fast would last a long time, but he was successful in making that point. So there's another reason. Yes.
Nowadays, people will tell you on social media if they're fasting. They'll say, well, I'm going to start a 3-day fast or a 4-day fast, and then they post every day doing it.
Right. I'm on Facebook because of the church. I don't think I would be on Facebook otherwise, but I'm just, I have had dear brethren post stuff on Facebook that is private or that is, what I'm having for lunch today. Who cares whether you have a Big Mac or whatever? But I'm getting off the track here. But this would be kind of be related because it's, it's just I'm doing something and I want people to know about it. Well, here's Jesus saying, well, you're doing things for God. You don't want people necessarily to know about it. We do from the standpoint of Matthew 5:16, right here in the Sermon on the Mount, let your light shine before men. But there are things that, we have to look deeper into our motives. Why am I doing this? And so if I'm doing things to be seen and be known by men to make me look like I'm super religious, well, then I've got a problem here. So the solution here, as the screen shows, is if you're fasting, especially, I don't know how long you have to fast before your face starts looking different. I would say 2 weeks at least until your face starts to shrivel up. Who knows? I don't see anybody in here who's fasting. But you're supposed to, wash up, put some balm on or whatever, so that you don't look like you're fasting. So,
I do remember years ago, fasting. It turned out they were taking turns. Someone's turn to fast for so many hours, and then they would step out. Someone else would take over for them. People wondered why are these people fasting and they all look so healthy? Because, they were just.
we're going to have tag team fasting. Go. Your turn. Okay. So, again, there's just. I don't know. Am I crazy? But I'm thinking, I can read through yes, there are hard places in the Bible to understand. But for the most part, I've always thought, the Bible is pretty easy to understand. Do you all have that general feeling about it? I don't need a PhD to go to heaven, and so, but this is one of those areas, where we get into this thing of about, doing things not to be seen by men, but doing things to be seen by God alone. Now, there is a coupling effect with fasting, and I don't think it's the first time, but over in Luke chapter 2, when Jesus is first born, and they take him to Jerusalem, and they meet an old woman there. Her name is Anna. She was known to be a very religious woman. It's always been a puzzle as to exactly how old she is because of how it's said. But anyways, it says in verse 37, this woman was a widow of about 84 years who did not depart from the temple, but served God with fastings and prayers. And that is not an uncommon coupling with fasting. Prayer is connected with it. Even here in Matthew chapter 6, we have the instructions about prayer, immediately followed by the instructions about fasting. And so it is something coupled together that meant a great deal. And so the question is, when you're thinking about what you're doing day to day with your life, and you hopefully pray, but how often do we fast? And I will just be honest and say, even though I've done it in the past, I have not done it lately. And so it's a bit of a challenge. And so the question is, well, let's not do that yet. Question number 6 on your bulletin: how can fasting help a Christian accomplish verses like Luke 9:23, which the sermon is going to be about this morning, about denying ourselves, following Christ, being more dedicated to God. I've already mentioned, fasting is I'm doing without physical things of this world, and so there's the connection. And so, would we be better off to fast more than we do? If fasting will help me to be more dedicated, is it a good thing for me to be practicing? And forget about the weight loss part of it. This is a problem with fasting is, I've been on 1 million diets in my life, and, but should we think of fasting as I'm fasting to lose another 10 pounds? Should that be our emphasis as we're kind of motivating ourselves to fast? Gwen?
I've never fasted. I was thinking just, you've been talking, it's been fasting, maybe it's, as a newcomer, maybe it would be teaching me to be more reliable and having faith
Okay.
in God and my prayers, and just that I'm doing without that He's gonna make sure I'm okay.
Right. Yeah, I think especially just that one point, I am de-emphasizing the world around me, whether it's food or entertainment, anything like that. From that standpoint, it would be very help us to, rededicate ourselves to God, a good thing. And let's look at question number 7. What other reasons might individual Christians have to fast about? Reasons to fast.
I think it should promote an ability to refocus
Okay.
on important things.
Yes. What are my priorities in life? I got this list off of the internet. I don't think you can read the small print off the screen, but biblical purposes for fasting: to strengthen prayer. Like I said, it's coupled with prayer. To seek God's guidance, to express grief. Talked about that. To see deliverance or protection. To express repentance and the return to God. To humble yourself before God. By the way, I just saw something on Facebook this morning from a congregation down south that I used to work with. I can't remember which one now. Anyways, they were getting ready to send one of their men to, I want to say, India, and the elders decided to, it showed it. They had a picture in there of the elders with the preacher and them praying together, and that's a perfect time to, throw some fasting into that. Let's fast. One of the problems I think that we have today is that we don't emphasize it enough. I'm going to say this may be the first time in 2 years that I've even mentioned fasting, and so right there off the bat, it's just not on our minds to do. So we as individual Christians don't do it. What about congregational fasting? Is that something that should be done? And we would, want to be careful on how we go about this. When the elders would come and say, well, let's say we're going to send Jeff to China, and so let's have a week of fasting. Of course, they can, they can recommend it, but we'd want to be careful about making it seem like it is a necessity. Everybody has to fast. And then why would that be? For some folks, fasting could be what? Detrimental to their health. Okay, we have a number, well, maybe not a whole lot, but we obviously know that there's certain health problems you need to be eating, and so we'd want to be careful about making those kinds of decisions. All right, so we get back to our list. We've got personal problems. We've got the need, the desire to be humble. If we were taking on a new work here, all these different reasons we have for fasting, and yet it's been my experience in talking to my brethren over the years, we hardly ever do it. All right, so the question is, well, number one, why? Why don't even I, as a preacher, talk about it or recommend it? Forced down your throat. Okay, but it still should be mentioned. It should be out there. Here's something that you can do, especially when in the case I just brought up a few minutes ago, we're sending one man over to the other side of the world. Well, let's fast for him and pray about his what he's hoping to accomplish. That would be a good thing. But on the other hand, so it's good. Here I am sitting in my home pew and living my own life. But here's one thing I can do: I can pray and fast about this. Especially when we read through the Gospels, this comes up occasionally about wanting something and fasting, not just praying about it, but fasting about it as well. Was helpful and recommended. Okay, so with that in mind, we recognize it. It's a biblical concept. It's something, again, just like the praying and just like doing the good works early in the chapter, we're going to do this without blowing a trumpet. Look at me, how religious I am. But it's just between me and God, and me and God and my food preparer. How we go about it. So, lastly then, from a practical standpoint, how do we get into fasting? Especially if you've never fasted before, the whole scary challenge of fasting is what? I'm going to die if I don't get my M&Ms. Yeah, Mark and I never have to fast because we've got a blood sugar problem. But yeah, it is planning for it. And again, you'd have to take your own health situation into account as to, how, it would be a terrible thing. And don't any of you do this. But if one person dies after Jeff speaks about fasting and word gets back, well, Jeff said we should be going without food. Please don't do that.
Diabetic, telling people to fast is very problematic because there's so many scriptures about the religious leaders telling people to do what they personally couldn't.
Right. Thanks a lot, Mark. Okay, so if you're okay, let's get back to this seriously. How would one plan to fast? First of all, if you're not self-disciplined, how easy is fasting? I mean, anybody in here, if you do even a little dieting, it's a little challenge.
Thank goodness we all have phones now that remind us of things. Don't plan ahead, you're in trouble.
Right. Does your phone say when your food is getting close to your lips? Alarm goes off.
It tells me that I can set it up when I should snack every 2 hours, but I don't.
Okay. Okay.
Around them.
All right.
So
So,
I think, sorry to answer
Go
your
ahead.
question in one sense, I think if we're not used to doing it, we can start in small ways. I think there's a biblical example in 1 Corinthians 7 that has nothing to do with food, but I think, and it doesn't use the word fasting, but it's the same principle. He's talking to husbands and wives, and he tells them not to deprive themselves of their physical intimacy, that that's something that husbands and wives you should be doing, said, except for a predetermined time where you together have decided, hey, we're going to spend this time praying instead. So the idea is we're depriving ourselves of something that we want, desire. If you're a man, might even say need. I shouldn't be sexist, I guess, but some people might even say that's a need of mine. But we're going to deprive ourselves of that for a period of time and instead devote ourselves to prayer and to refocusing and to, so again, it doesn't use the word fasting, but it's the same principle. So I think we could apply that to a lot of things. If my routine is that I have to wake up and drink 3 cups of coffee to get my day going, maybe I cut back on my coffee for a couple of days, or just not because coffee's evil, but because I am depriving myself of something that I normally indulge in. And instead, I'm going to spend extra time in prayer or meditation. I think that would be a starting place for somebody that's not used to
right.
a full-fledged
Right.
fast.
Yeah, we, even little habits about the way that we eat. I discovered this a few years ago, but just going without any snacks between meals. I discovered this is not easy. But then, of course, if you eat breakfast at 7 and you're getting ready to dive into the M&Ms at 10, and you decide, well, I can I can wait till 2 more hours for lunch. But that's very much like fasting is. So I agree with Keith. It's incremental. You don't want to fast for a week the first time you fast, but you just kind of get your head in the right place, and especially as Jesus is pointing out here, especially with why we are fasting, and we can be successful, and also it's almost because of what Jesus says here. It's not like we're going to say on Wednesday night we're going to have a group meeting about fasting and everybody's going to tell how well they're doing. I've never seen that done, but there's a reason for that. Here's Jesus saying, well, you need to be keeping this quiet, and this is between you and God. And so it's a paradoxical, I think I've chosen the right word, paradoxical thing to plan for and to be successful at. Okay, we got less than a minute. Any final comments about it? Everybody's looking forward to fasting. How fast after the Super Bowl? How fast after the World Cup? How fast whatever? How fast when the Pirates have a losing record again? We'll see how that goes. All right. If nothing further, we are done.